right, hello once again, everybody. This is the last segment for the Harry Potter class. Welcome back to the Time and Space Radio Show. I'm your host, Mike Smith, and you can find us at timeandspace.us. Look for us on Facebook, facebook.com/listener22, or just search for Time and Space Radio Show. We've got two final guests up here. We appreciate you guys joining us. We've had a rotation of students coming through. I thought everybody was fantastic, and we appreciate your thoughts and your time. Let's welcome Matt to the stage. Matt, where are you from?
I'm from Fredericksburg.
From Fredericksburg, Virginia. What are you studying here at Farrah?
That's a very good question. I'm studying history, and I have an intention to minor in chemistry, teacher education, and social studies, sociology. I was actually inspired by the...
Are they going to just build your own building here? And
I think Matthew's taken the buffet approach to college. A little of this, a little of that.
You could just call me something of a natural philosopher. I don't remember exactly where I saw it, but I basically just kind of wanted to learn everything now.
Very good. There's nothing wrong with that. The truly educated never stop learning, right? And Jacob, welcome to the stage, sir. Where are you from?
Lovettsville.
Lovettsville. Excellent. And what are you studying here at Farrah?
I am an art major with a minor in biology.
And how many years have you been here?
This is my last year.
Your last year. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Why a Harry Potter class?
Partly for the credit and partly because I wanted to take it.
And what have you read all the books?
Yes, I have.
You have. Seen all the movies?
Yes, except the first 10 minutes of the last one.
First 10 minutes? Let's say that couldn't be more confusing because now it's two movies, so
yeah.
Who knows which 10 minutes that actually turns out to be. Very good. And what's your presentation going to be
on? Brian Jakes, the Sable Queen.
Okay. And what's the angle there, if you will?
Do you know much about the Redwall series?
I don't.
The Redwall series is set in medieval kind of time with, instead of humans, it is a world populated by anthropomorphic animals. So the Redwall Abbey, the main focus of most of the stories, is inhabited by peaceful woodland creatures like moles, squirrels, and mice, with a few otters thrown in there, here and there. And they have to contend with the vermin of the forest, foxes, stoats, and the not-so-pleasant kind you would find. And so, in Jake's stories, there's usually some big bad that comes up, and one of the woodland heroes, or maybe one of the warrior heroes from Salamandastron, has to, or heck, even the Badger Lords, has to take up the mantle to defeat the big bad and save Mossflower Wood.
So really, there's a lot of common themes going back and forth there. I mean, you could sort of interchange character names and a little bit of the plot line into Harry Potter, into any of these others, where it's sort of, again, let's go to the Lord of the Rings for just a second, where we have to save the Shire, you know, even save Middle-earth entirely. I mean, it's...
I want to comment on something that hasn't come up from our course readings. Nobody has mentioned the Sword and the Stone. And as I said, we have been talking about the Arthurian romances. I was thinking as Jacob was talking, the connection is that when Merlin is training Arthur, a lot of that training puts Arthur into the animal kingdom, that he goes into the kingdom of the fish, for example, and he has an opportunity to observe the pike and see what kind of a ruler he is as part of his training for becoming a ruler.
Right.
So that's, you mentioned animals before, that's a connection, I think, with the Arthurian legends, and specifically with the part of that legend when Arthur is being trained.
Right. And see, I don't want to go too far off the edge here, but the animal kingdom thing is one of the most interesting twists to any of the fantasy stuff, because again, when you get into the literature, the information that's out there, when you start to talk about all this UFO type stuff, that crossover shows up immediately, and it's just really interesting and makes you stop and ask questions. I said this to you a couple times in the previous interview. Where is Rowling getting her information from? Obviously some of the other fantasy literature, but it really almost just creeps out onto the edge of where the conspiracy theory people like to hang out, and you just wonder where she's trying to go with it. It probably helped draw a lot of the criticism that she dealt with and faced on that. Let me move back to you, Matt. What's your presentation going to be?
I've already done my presentation on a book that was the sequel to another book in a series. Have you heard of Magic the Gathering?
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the nerdy card games, kind of like, I guess you can imagine Pokemon crossed with Lord of the Rings, sort of, and Harry Potter, and just the nerdiest thing you can imagine.
I
But
think that's called Yu-Gi-Oh, isn't it?
no, Yu-Gi-Oh
Close,
is the
but not
Japanese
really.
version. Magic the Gathering is the one where you get like even nerdier. Yeah.
See, you're just pushing the bounds as hard as you possibly can.
So
Is that what it is?
anyway, though, they recently have been writing, scripting their whole world to be kind of just more to it than just the cards, and making main characters for following the storylines that they're making up for Planeswalkers. And I did my report on one of the Planeswalkers called Tezzeret, who is like artificer, mechanist, scientist type of guy, and he's got a really interesting adventure where he goes through this quest of self-perfection, and I was just really stunned by, in the last place I expected to find it, here was a perfect class example textbook of a Joseph Campbell hero myth. You've got the hero from the humble background, this just city slum, and that has a call to adventure. He goes through a road of trials. There's even a scene where he has to come to terms with his father after he's gone through some adult adventures. He has to return home and resolve that side plot. And there's even this like divine ascension point where he attains a quest of ultimate power, but he only does it by an internal character self-development, which was to become the sort of person that no longer cared about having that power. That was the key to attaining it. And I was just like really surprisingly deep stuff for something that I found for $7 off of Borders sci-fi and fantasy shelf.
Right.
Yeah, and so that was a really interesting book that I read. But
There's a connection there. I think we talked a lot about the theme of the mastery of death in the Harry Potter series and what it means to become master of death. You know, in the last book, Rowling introduces that collection of folk tales that includes the tale of the three brothers. And the idea is that the mastery of death is the acceptance of the idea that people are mortal, as somebody said before in relation to Gilgamesh. You know, the idea that you have to admit that you're going to die and there's no reason to try to escape that.
You're referring to Beetle the Bard, right? The Tales
Yes.
of Beetle the Bard. You know, I should have brought this up in the last interview with you. Is there any crossover there, do you think, with the Arabian Nights? I mean, the book has the exact same feel to me as that collection of stories, and I'm just curious if that's what Rowling.
Go ahead, Matthew.
Okay. Yes, the Tales of Beetle the Bard reminded me not only of the Arabian Nights, but also of Grimm's fairy tales,
Mhm.
and also of D'Ailaire's Book of Greek Myths, and just all of the different collections of, this is your book of childhood stories that you tell myths with. This is the stories, as Sam put, we seem to always be getting back to Lord of the Rings, the stories that really matter. The stories that you hear as a child, that you don't understand everything about them, but they're an adventure story that has a happy ending, and you go back and you find deep meaning in them.
Right.
I want to say about that in the dedication to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, which is another work we read and haven't talked about much, C.S. Lewis, dedicating that to his goddaughter, says, you may be too old now by the time this series is published to read folk tales and fairy tales, but there will be a time when you will be old enough again to read them. And I think that's the point that Matthew's getting at, that there is another layer, maybe it's an archetypal layer of those tales. I personally love the insertion into the Harry Potter series of the folk tales, and the idea that even in the wizarding world there are these stories that young witches and wizards are told. And I wanted to just briefly talk about one really cool thing that happened during my summer enrichment camp this year. The children had seen a performance of the Jack Tales, which I know you're familiar with, and the next day in class, we were planning to talk about the Tales of Beetle the Bard. So we talked about the Jack Tales, traditional Appalachian folklore, and the performance style of the Jack Tale players, who've been performing Jack Tales for people now for going on 36 years, I think. They are literally the the longest running children's theater performing group in the country. And so we talked about the Jack Tales. The next day we were going to talk about the tale of the three brothers, and the students said, can we just act it out? Can we just use that Jack Tales style? So they did that, and we videotaped it, and it was just brilliant.
Now, the three brothers, that's a scene in one of the movies, at least, right? They actually tell the tale of the three brothers
Yeah.
in Deathly Hallows.
Yes.
Is that correct? And then there's also a scene, if I'm remembering correctly, where somebody comes into, he's the executor of Dumbledore's will, and gives somebody a copy of that book. Is that right?
Yes. Left to Hermione. He's left something specifically to Harry and to Ron, and to Hermione he's left the Tales of Beedle the Bard.
But Hermione is not familiar with the stories, surprisingly so. I mean, you would think with everything else she's been able to reference throughout the whole thing. It's what, Ron Weasley's the one that actually knows.
That's right, because he was born into a pure-blood wizarding family, and he was told those stories in his youth by his family. And he sort of discounts their relevance to anything going on in the real world. I mean, they were just kind of childhood stories. I think it's because Hermione's the most intellectual of the three that book is left to her.
Sure. I'm not sure that they say that directly, but they certainly imply it. All right, so a question for the students real quick, because we're going to wrap this up. We just have a couple minutes left. Do you guys imagine, after having spent a semester with Dr. Whitehead, that her house is just nothing but Potter stuff everywhere? Posters.
Very well could be.
I mean, you've been up to her office, right? The Sorting Hat is up there, right? Exactly. I don't know if do you have Harry Potter parties?
There's
or
a
anything
very
like that?
large Hedwig balloon coming over the window.
Actually, the one thing that I was really excited about asking you before we had even started any of this, I was going to open with it, but I guess I can just finish with it just as easily. Before you got into the Harry Potter stuff, before the books ever crossed your radar, what did you think of that type of stuff, of that type of fantasy literature, of all the kids that were the Star Wars geeks?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I was not myself a reader of fantasy growing up. I mean, it was kind of a rediscovery for me, and I have read a fair amount of fantasy since I got interested in the Harry Potter series. I started reading them for the same reason a lot of people did. I bought the first 2 books for my nephews as a Christmas present, and they turned out to be pretty book-proof. They're baseball players, and they never read the books, but I picked them up because I wanted to know what the whole phenomenon was about.
What was your the first time you encountered Potter? Do you have any specific memory of that?
Well, I remember that I gave them to my nephews as a Christmas present, and because they didn't seem particularly interested, after a few days, I just started reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and I really couldn't put it down.
Had you just picked them off of like a children's literature list and said, "Oh,
yeah,
these look like good books"?
I just got them because I knew that they were popular. But you know, the other thing that I think is very interesting about the Harry Potter series is that by the time, I guess, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, when the phenomenon really broke open and suddenly people were, going for the bookstore experience at midnight, all that kind of thing. Prior to that, early on, especially with the first couple of books, it was word of mouth, child to child, largely, which is the way that the popularity really spread. And when Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban was released in England, the release was deliberately set for late afternoon because people were afraid children would skip school to get the book. I mean, how cool is that,
that. Yeah, exactly. I was going to tell you this. I said this to you before we got started today. I'll wrap up with this strange thought. It had to be all the way back the mid-'90s at some point. A shout-out to our friend Matt Donovan up in Boston, works in the mayor's office up there. Matt and I are working up in the sports store, and this guy comes running through. I guess he was looking for a gift at the last second or something. He comes running in the store, and he's wearing a Hogwarts sweatshirt. I had never heard of Harry Potter. I didn't know what Hogwarts was, knew nothing about it. This guy could not shut up for the next 5 minutes raving about, these are the most incredible books I've ever read. Everybody on the planet is going to read these books. They're going to make them into multi-million-dollar movies, and I can't believe you haven't heard about it. And he turned around and ran out the door. And all this guy Matt and I can say to each other is, who the hell was that? Should we call security? What is Hogwarts? What is this guy talking about? And now I'm sitting here doing a stage show, interviewing people taking a college course about
That's
Harry
your karma,
Potter.
Mike.
Yeah, I
That's
guess it must be. No, Carolina City, but thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate that. All right. Thank you guys for joining us. Did you have something else you wanted to throw in? You look like you were about to say something there. Before I cut you off. Too late.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Time and Space Radio Show, timeandspace.us. We're going to be interviewing After Jack in about an hour and a half here, and you can find us on YouTube this afternoon. Thanks again. Thank you, Dr. White.
Take me to your lead there. My head hurts.